The lantern swung in Clara Holt's hand as she crossed the yard, its light catching the frost just beginning to form on the fence rails. She had heard the horse before she saw it. A slow, uneven step on the road, then silence. That kind of silence meant the animal had stopped walking because it could not go further. She unlatched the yard gate and held the lamp out. A man stood at the fence. He was lean and trail-worn, coat dark with dust, hat held at his side rather than on his head. That was the detail she noticed first. He had taken his hat off before she even opened the gate, not as performance, but as a reflex. Something in him had already decided to wait rather than push. "Ma'am," his voice was level, unhurried. "Horse pulled up lame about a mile back. I've been walking her slow. I'm not asking for much. Dry corner for her. Dry corner for me." One night, Clara held the lamp steady and read him the way a person reads weather. Not his clothes, not his saddle, the set of his shoulders. The fact that he was standing 3 feet from her gate and had not touched it. "Come through," she said. She led the horse herself, holding the lamp low to watch the mare's left foreleg. A soft tissue strain, nothing broken. She put the horse in the far stall, away from the cold seam in the barn wall, and folked clean stroll without being asked. The man said nothing. He helped without being directed, lifting the water bucket, checking the latch on the stall door. He did not fill the silence with explanation or gratitude. He simply worked beside her the way someone works when they know how work is done. She left him with the barn lamp turned to medium and walked back to the house. Inside, she cut bread, wrapped it in cloth, and carried it back without stopping to think about it. She set it on the stall rail. He looked at the bread, then at her. "I'm obliged, ma'am." "Lamp's yours till 10, she said. "There's a blanket on the hook by the door." She walked back across the yard. Across the east field, through the bare trees, the lamp in Agnes Whitmore's window burned in a steady square of yellow light. A shadow moved near the glass. Clara did not look long. She set her own lamp on the kitchen table, sat down, and did not bolt the door. She thought about bolting it. Then she thought about the night outside, the cold settling hard, the stars too bright the way they get when the temperature drops fast. She thought about a man who had taken his hat off before she even opened the gate. She left the door as it was and went to bed. Out here, a cold man asking for a dry corner isn't asking for much. She woke before first light, as she always did. By the time she crossed the yard with the coffee, the barn was already quiet in a different way, the way barns are quiet when someone is awake inside them, but not moving. She pushed the door open and found him crouched beside the mare's foreleg, not examining it but wrapping it, a strip of clean cloth wound with practiced care. She looked at the cloth. He had torn it from the lining of his own saddlebag. "Coffee," she said, and handed him the cup. He stood and took it with both hands, the way a man takes something he actually needs. His face in the morning light was older than she had first thought. 40, perhaps more. Lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting into distance rather than from laughter. "Nathaniel Cord," he said. "Clara Holt." They did not shake hands. There was no need. She left him his coffee and walked the property, as she did every morning, checking the fences, the water trough, the shed where the winter feed was stacked. The south pasture line was holding, except for 3 rails near the creek crossing that had buckled in last month's rain. She had been meaning to get to them. When she came back, Cord was standing at the south fence, looking at the buckled rails with his coffee cup still in hand. "That one's been sitting crooked a while," he said. "Since September. Horse needs another day easy. I could get to the fence while I wait." She considered. He was not asking for permission exactly. He was offering, and offering squarely. The way you offer something when you mean for it to be fair trade. "I'll find you the tools," she said. They worked separately through the morning, her on the kitchen garden, him on the fence line. She watched his hands from a distance once, the way he tested each rail before setting it. Not the rough hands of a man who does all his own labor, not the soft hands of a man who does none. Something in between, the hands of someone who had worked with them once and had never entirely stopped. Agnes rode past on the road at mid-morning, heading toward town. She slowed her horse to a walk. Her eyes moved from Clara to the man on the fence line and back, and they did not carry anything so simple as curiosity. Agnes was a careful woman. She was reading something, making a calculation, filing it away. She did not stop. She did not wave. Clara returned to her kitchen garden. "You know the Cord River Range?" she asked him at noon, when he brought the tools back. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately name. "I know the river," he said. "Gossip travels faster than any horse, and it don't need feeding." He was gone before she rose on the third morning. She knew it before she crossed the yard. The barn had a different quality of stillness. The settled quiet of a space returned to itself. The stall was clean, the blanket folded on the hook, the barn lamp extinguished and hung back in its place. On the fence post by the gate, a coin. She picked it up, turned it. A silver dollar, which was more than the bread was worth by a distance. She stood at the post with it in her palm and felt the weight of it, which was not quite the weight of silver. Thomas used to say that a dry barn was the most honest thing a person could offer. Not a full table, not a warm bed. Those were things you had to have in surplus before you could share them. But a barn in winter, a dry corner, a place to wait out the cold, that was something even a lean year couldn't take from you. She had not thought of that in a long time. The thought came back to her now, not as grief, but as recognition, the way certain things return to you when the circumstances finally match them. She set the coin back on the post. It was not a refusal exactly. It was more like a statement. She had not offered the barn because she could afford to. She had offered it because the night was cold and he was cold, and that was the whole of the arithmetic. Taking the coin now would change the accounting of it, would make it a transaction she had agreed to rather than a choice she had made. She left it on the post and walked back inside. The morning work took her 3 hours. She mended a seam in the winter coat, banked the fire, turned the soil in the cold frame where she was trying to winter over the kale. Thomas had planted that frame the autumn before he died. She had kept it going out of habit the first year, and out of something she couldn't name the second. By noon the coin was still on the post. She could see it from the kitchen window. By evening a thin line of clouds had moved in from the northwest, and the temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. She made supper, ate alone, washed the pot. Through the window she could see Agnes's lamp already lit across the field, earlier than usual. She did not think about Nathaniel Cord. She thought about the fence rails, now straight and solid along the south pasture, holding the line the way they were supposed to hold it. She thought about his hands. Then she went to bed and did not think about anything at all. A man who pays for what wasn't owed is either honest or guilty. Either way, he knows the difference. Sunday came with a hard, flat sky. Clara walked to service as she had every week for 2 years, alone. Coat buttoned to the collar, the road frozen enough to hold her footsteps cleanly. The church was already half filled when she arrived, which meant she heard the adjustment in the room before she saw its source. It was not silence. It was a subtle redistribution of attention, the way a room reshuffles itself when something new has entered the accounting. Agnes was already seated beside Mrs. Dunlap. Their eyes found Clara the moment she came through the door, a half-second ahead of everything else. She took a pew 3 rows forward and did not look back. The sermon was about stewardship. She listened without hearing most of it. After service, she stopped at Dunlap's store for flour and salt. Mr. Dunlap measured and wrapped and wrote the numbers in his ledger with the careful neutrality of a man performing an ordinary task in an extraordinary way, the kind of neutrality that costs something to maintain. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Bess Harlan caught her arm on the road home, falling into step beside her with the gentle urgency of someone who has been waiting for a private moment. "People are saying things, Clara." "What kind of things?" Bess opened her mouth and then closed it, because the things were not the kind that could be said plainly to someone's face. They were the kind that circulated in halves, half fact, half implication, each half made worse by the other. "I'm only telling you because I care," Bess said. "You know that." "I know that, Bess. I appreciate it." They parted at the crossroads. Clara walked the last half-mile home alone. She made the turn into her own gate and saw the coin still on the fence post, bright in the gray afternoon light. She had not moved it. She did not move it now. She walked past it to the house, hung her coat, and put the kettle on. She set the table for one, as she always did, and ate her Sunday supper in the quiet. She had done nothing wrong. She had done nothing she would not do again. The flour and the salt sat on the shelf where they always sat, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the cold was doing what cold did in October, which was to settle in and remind everyone what the nights were going to be like from here until April. She washed her dish. She dried it. She put it back in its place. A quiet woman makes the loudest kind of noise in a small town. He came back on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after he had gone. She was splitting wood behind the house when she heard the horse at the front gate. She came around the corner of the house with the axe still in her hand, which was just habit and not a statement, and found Nathaniel Cord dismounting at the fence. He reached into his saddlebag and held up a hinge, the old iron hinge from the barn door that had been stiff since summer. "Left one broken," he said. "Bothers me." She looked at the hinge. He had apparently carried it with him, which meant he had thought about it. She set the axe against the woodpile. "Tools are in the shed," she said. He fixed the hinge in 20 minutes. She made coffee. She had not announced she was making, and when she brought it to the barn he was already testing the door, swinging it back and forth to check the movement. He seemed satisfied. He followed her to the kitchen without being asked. They sat at opposite sides of the table. The stove was going and the room was warm, in the way rooms are warm when someone has been working in them all morning. She wrapped both hands round her cup. He did the same. "You have land?" she asked. Some. Managing it alone?" "I have help." She nodded. He looked at the room, not evaluating it, just taking it in the way you take in a room you find yourself at ease in. "You're managing 60 acres by yourself," he said. It was not quite a question. "Thomas used to say 60 acres was a full man's work," she said. "I suppose that's true." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile. More the preparation for one that decided to stay quiet. How long? 2 winters now. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Outside, the wind was picking up from the northwest, the kind of wind that comes in November and does not leave until March. She told him about Bess Harlan's warning without calling it a warning, mentioned only that people in town had been paying attention. He went still in a particular way when she said it, his coffee cup not quite lifted, not quite set down. He looked at the table. "I'm sorry for that," he said. "It's not your doing." "No," he said, "but it's my name that." He stopped. She watched him decide not to finish the sentence. She did not understand the hesitation then. She filed it away, the way you file away things that don't quite fit the shape they should fit. After he left, she stood in the kitchen a moment, thinking about the half-finished sentence, about his coffee cup not quite settling, about a man who apologized for something he said was not his doing. There's a thing about a man who knows more than he's saying. He's quieter than a man who knows nothing at all. Agnes came on a Thursday afternoon. Clara saw her crossing the field from the kitchen window, walking, not riding, which meant she had made a considered decision. Agnes was a woman who rode when she was in a hurry and walked when she had prepared what she was going to say. She wore her church coat, which was also the coat she wore when she was trying to be taken seriously. Clara opened the door before she knocked. "Come in, Agnes." Agnes came in. She did not take off her coat. She stood in the kitchen with her hands clasped in front of her and looked at Clara with an expression that was genuinely worried, which was somehow worse than if it had been sharp or accusing. "You're a sensible woman," Agnes said. "You've always been sensible. That's why I'm here. Say what you came to say." Agnes said it. She talked about reputation, how a widow's reputation was the only currency she had that couldn't be taken by drought or debt. She talked about men who were kind to women who asked no questions. She talked about not knowing someone's intentions, not knowing someone's history, not understanding what a man like that might want from a woman who lived alone on a modest parcel outside of town. She was not cruel. That was the complicated thing. Her words were the words of a woman who had learned to protect herself through smallness and wanted, genuinely, to teach that smallness to Clara. She meant every word as a kindness. Clara listened to all of it. Then she said, "I knew what kind of night it was." Agnes stopped. "He was cold," Clara said. "I had a dry barn." "That's the end of it." Agnes's expression shifted, not to anger, but to something more like sorrow, the sorrow of someone watching a person make a choice they believe is a mistake. She unclenched her hands. She looked at the kitchen, at the scrub table and the stove, and the 2 cups still on the shelf from Tuesday. "I'll be right," she said. "I know I am." Agnes left. Clara closed the door, not hard, not soft, just closed. She sat down at the table. The lamp was already burning low, the afternoon gone gray outside the window. She sat with the question Agnes had left in the room, the one that lingered even after she was certain of her answer. Does a choice made in innocence still count as courage? She didn't know the answer to that. She let the lamp burn lower and did not reach for the oil. When it went out, she sat a few more minutes in the dark thinking about Thomas, thinking about the kale in the cold frame, thinking about nothing she could name. Then she went to bed. Sometimes the kindest thing a person can say to you is the wrong thing, and you have to let them mean well anyway. She rode into town on a Friday to settle the autumn seed account. The bank was quiet, mid-morning. 2 men stood near the back wall talking, their voices low enough to be private, but not low enough, in a room with plank floors and no furnishings to absorb sound. She heard the name while the clerk was writing her receipt. Cord River Range. She knew the name as geography, the river that came down off the North Ridge before it bent east toward the flats. The mill, she knew the mill, had sent grain there twice. The east quarter of Callow Creek, that was 1/3 of the productive land in the valley. She heard them say Nathaniel Cord and understood in a single moment the full shape of what she had not known. The clerk handed her the receipt. She folded it, put it in her coat pocket, and walked out the front door with her chin level and her pace even. She sat on the hitching rail outside. The street was ordinary, 2 women with baskets, a wagon being loaded at the hardware. The cold was ordinary. The sky was white with cloud cover, and the bare trees on the far side of the road were ordinary. She sat and thought. She thought about the night in October, the lamp swinging in her hand, a horse standing lame at her gate. She thought about bread cut and wrapped and carried across a dark yard. She thought about a man who took his hat off before she opened the gate, who tore cloth from his own saddlebag to wrap a horse's leg, who came back 3 weeks later because a hinge bothered him. She thought about what she would have done if she had known. The answer came back the same way it always came back when she asked honest questions of herself. She would have done the same thing. The night had been cold. He had been cold. She had a dry barn. The rest of it, the land, the mill, the east quarter, none of that lived in the barn on that October night. None of it changed the arithmetic. She stood. She adjusted her coat. She untied her horse and mounted without hurry and rode back toward Callow Creek. The coin was still on the post when she got home. She unsaddled her horse, put the mare in the stall, and came back out into the yard. She looked at the coin. She did not touch it. Not yet. You judge a valley by how it treats the stranger who rides in without a name. The harvest gathering was held on the first Saturday of November in Dunlap's Hall at the edge of town. Clara had attended every year since she came to Callow Creek as Thomas's wife. She had attended the 2 years since without him, because not attending would have been a statement she wasn't ready to make. She wore her good dress, which was blue-gray wool, and she walked in alone and found a place near the far wall where she could see the room. The hall was full. Lanterns hung from the rafters in a row. A fiddle was going in the corner. People grouped in the patterns they always grouped in, the Dunlaps with the Whitmore family, the younger couples near the door, the older ranchers in a knot at the back where the cider was set out. Nathaniel Cord was in that knot. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing with 3 men whose names she knew but whose company she had never been part of, the men who held the deeds and the accounts and the seats on the county committee. They held their hats differently around him, not with deference exactly, with the careful ease of men who have learned to be comfortable near power. She watched him for a moment. He looked the same. That was the thing. He looked precisely the same as he had in her barn. Then he turned and found her across the room. He said something brief to the men beside him. Then he crossed the floor. He did not thread his way carefully, the way you move through a room when you don't want to be noticed. He walked directly, at his regular pace, and people shifted without being asked because that is what happens when a man who owns a third of the valley moves through a room. But he wasn't looking at the room. He was looking at her. "Mrs. Holt," he said when he reached her. "Mr. Cord." He stood beside her and looked out at the gathering for a moment, the way 2 people look at the same thing when they are standing together rather than facing each other. "I should have told you," he said quietly, "who I was. You told me your name. I told you a name. It wasn't the whole of it." She considered. "Why didn't you?" He was quiet a moment. Around them the fiddle played and the room moved and the lantern swung faintly in the draught from the door. "Because it was the first night in a long time," he said, "that someone was just ordinary with me." She understood that. She had understood it before he said it, which was perhaps why she was not angry. Agnes, across the room, had gone still. Not cold, still, the kind of stillness that precedes the slow work of reassessment. Mrs. Dunlap was watching too, and old Grayson from the north pasture, and Bess Harlan with her hand over her mouth. Clara did not look at any of them. She looked at the room because she was in it, and because this was her gathering as much as anyone else's, and because she had been attending it for 11 years and she intended to keep attending it. She was the same woman she had been in October, standing at her gate with a lamp. That, in the end, was the whole of it. The truest thing about a person is what they do in the dark, before anyone knows to watch. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning with the first real frost of November hardening the ground to iron, Clara heard a horse at her front gate. She was at the kitchen window when she heard it. She set down her cup and looked out. Nathaniel Cord stood at the front gate, the good gate, the one that faced the road, the one she used for company and for church and for the 2 men who had come to tell her about Thomas. He was holding his horse's reins and waiting. the same as he had waited at the barn gate 6 weeks ago, hat in his hand. Some things do not change. She put on her coat and walked out. He watched her cross the yard. He did not come through the gate until she reached it. "I'd like to call on you," he said. "Properly, if that's something you'd allow." The frost was bright on the fence rails. Her breath made small clouds. She looked at him in the thin morning light, at the worked hands and the road-worn coat and the expression of a man who was asking something he knew he might not be granted. She thought about Agnes's visit, about the Sunday service and the flour measured with careful neutrality, about sitting on the hitching rail outside the bank, letting the arithmetic work itself out. She thought about the coin. "The gate's been open," she said. He looked at the gate, then at her. Something eased in his face, not relief exactly, but the settling of attention held for longer than the last 6 weeks. "I know," he said. "I noticed." She turned and walked toward the fence post along the south pasture line, the line he had mended in October, the rails now solid and square against the cold ground. The post at the corner. She had walked past it every day for 6 weeks and not touched what was on it. She picked up the coin. She turned it in her fingers. A silver dollar, worn smooth, worth more than the bread had been worth. She had left it on the post because taking it would have changed the accounting, would have made that October night into a transaction she had agreed to in advance. She understood now that she had always been the one to decide what it was. She pocketed it. Not as payment received, not as anything owed or settled, as something she had been carrying since October without knowing it, something she had earned the right to hold. Behind her, the gate was still open. She heard him come through it. The frost caught the light along every fence rail, and the sky above Callow Creek was pale and still, and somewhere in the cold frame by the south wall the kale was holding on, the way it had held on through 2 winters without anyone expecting it to. She put her hand in her pocket over the coin and walked back toward the house. A barn door kept shut on a freezing night says more about the owner than all the sermons in the county,